Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film Joyride. Okay, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Joyride?
Sure. Follows four Chinese American friends as they bond and discover the truth of what it means to know and love who you are while they travel through China in search of one of their birth mothers.
Oh, that follows. It just cracked me up.
It's also just so many words in one sentence. I feel like
that's not a sentence.
Exactly. We really could have pared down this fragment some.
Mm-hmm. This fragment. This very large fragment.
It's a very large fragment. But it's a lot of words. It's doing a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's kick off with our one-sentence summaries for Joyride. What was yours, Sarah?
Mine is K-pop and internet friends save the day.
They do. That was such a wonderful little moment. Yes. My one-sentence summary is not your grandmother's Joy Luck Club.
Definitely not.
Nope. Okay, before we start, though, I have to give a quick shout out because in reference to Not Your Grandmother's Joy Luck Club, there were two older ladies, probably in their late 70s, white ladies, that were front and center for this movie.
Wow.
And I just want to take them to lunch and ask them their thoughts. I'm so intrigued. Like, how did they choose this movie? What did they think of it? All the raunchiness. Like, did they have thoughts? Did they love it? I want to know.
Wow.
Yeah, I was so surprised.
Okay. I am impressed. Way to go.
Just the two of them. Just the two of them on a little, it was like, I think 5 p.m. on a Saturday. Just a little Saturday night out with the girls. Oh my goodness. Like, which of the two was like, hey, do you want to go see this movie? You know?
Right? And like, what research did they do beforehand? Like, did somebody watch a trailer? How much did they know before going into this experience?
Yeah. I was trying to get a look at their facial expressions as I was walking out of the theater, but alas, I could not see clearly enough from the glow of the television screen as the credits are rolling. But I'm very curious, so it just tickled me to imagine them on their little Saturday night out.
Wow, what a great choice! I'm glad that they chose Joyride.
Right? I would love to be that cool when I'm in my late 70s.
Oh my gosh, yes. I am not going to be that cool, and I already know that, and I've accepted that about myself. But I hope that you get your wish.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny because we were chatting before this episode about how we haven't reviewed a comedy like this in a very long time. It's been a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure has.
I don't even know like what other film that we might have reviewed that kind of is in the same category of like raunchy, romp, absolute, just like messy, chaotic, that brand of comedy. Mm-hmm. Have we done one?
I don't know. I think we're gonna have a really interesting conversation with this movie because simply because like I don't know that we've reviewed a lot of movies like this, because I know that I personally would not seek out a movie with this type of humor. And so,
me neither.
So that's why I don't think we've done another one. I don't know. I can't remember.
You know what's funny is that like I don't think that we would go to watch this type of movie typically.
No.
Nor would we feel like this type of movie is worth an hour-long episode review on our podcast.
Yeah.
You know? Like there's two categories and most of the movies in this category don't hit any of those thresholds for us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why when we were doing content planning, I was like, you know what? This is our moment. If we're gonna do a movie like this, let's do it with Joyride, because at least there's gonna be something for us to talk about, and it kind of is an exciting moment for the AAPI community too.
Yeah, and I think we picked a good one.
We did. We've hit our
Delve into
quota
this genre
for this genre.
because there is a lot going on here where there
Yes.
isn't always in movies with this type of humor.
Well, I was just, there'd be moments in this movie where I was just imagining to myself, like, man, I wonder what Sarah's just like stream of consciousness is at this moment in this movie. Like, I just wonder what's going through her head right now.
Honestly, a lot of it was I am 800 years old. was kind of the consensus, and it wasn't
Oh man.
it was really fascinating to watch because like it wasn't like I am a white person and I'm watching a different culture. Like it wasn't that. It was, even though I'm a few years older than these people, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. That was most of what it is. Cause like, I don't know what K-pop is. Like, I've heard of it, don't know anything about it. There were so many references that I was like, I am not online or on social media enough to understand what this means, but I'm glad that you're having a fun time with it. Like, that was me for a good chunk of the movie. Was I am ancient and I am okay with this.
You were like at the zoo, just like observing the specimen.
Honestly,
like,
yeah,
interesting. Okay.
yeah.
They're
I
excited about this thing. Very, very intriguing. Let's jot that down.
I felt like an anthropologist studying another culture,
Oh
but
my goodness. It
I
is.
think
I think there's actually like two combinations of things, which is a lot of the jokes are related to the Asian community, which like already
yeah,
there's that gap, and then there's like a lot of the youth culture and pop culture stuff too. So the combination
mhm,
of those two things.
yep, yep. Did not get a lot of it, but every time they made fun of a white person, I thought it was hilarious. I thought that that was great.
Perfect.
I was like, yes, let's just always make fun of white people. We deserve it. Keep them coming. It was great. So
Oh.
in those moments, I laughed very hard.
Okay,
But
great.
in a lot of the pop culture moments, I was like, nope, I have no
Like
idea.
what?
This is cool. If people enjoy this, I'm glad that they are enjoying this.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
Okay, so I am now curious to hear just your overall thoughts of Joyride. How was we've touched on a little bit of your viewing experience. What do you think of the movie itself?
Yeah, I again like this is I struggle to talk about this because it's not a me movie, and like I know that this is not a movie that's made for me. So I don't take everything that I have to say with a grain of salt. But if I get past, like all the like raunchy jokes, which are not my thing, all of the pop culture stuff that I just don't understand.
If we strip away 90% of the
We
movie.
strip away 90% of the movie. I really appreciate that this exists. I really appreciate some of the deeper themes, things around, I think like the complexities of adoption, I think is a really good one. I think there are some of the ways that they resolve Audrey's story arc in the end that I really, really love. And just honestly having a movie like this with Asian leads, and it's a comedy, I think that that's great. It doesn't just need to be white men or white women who can lead comedy movies, but we have other comedic voices that are coming to the surface, and I think that that's really special. And then despite all of that, there's also this deeper emotional anchor that I think is pretty solid that are pointing to these larger themes, which I did appreciate. So I think it's not a movie for me, but I think I'm glad that it exists, and I think that it does have a lot to say, which I appreciate, that it's not just this like shallow film, but there's some deeper meaning there if you want to look for it.
Yeah, there's a lot more of an emotional core to this movie than I think I was even expecting going into this movie. I thought it would be a lot more of just like a ridiculous romp, but there's a lot of like pretty emotional moments, and the film is pretty open-hearted about wearing its heart on its sleeve and just inviting you into those emotions and creating time and space for them. Um, I think that as a comedy, there's some just I just wish it was a little bit sharper. There are some moments where the comedy and its underlying meaning are incredibly aligned, and that those parts were so fascinating to me. So the scene where Audrey chooses to be in that train car with uh, the white lady, which I don't want to
Mm,
spoil anything, but there's
yeah.
so many like underlying layers there that I'm like, oh, like I wish a lot more of the comedic moments were like that, where if you peel back the layers of it, like after you stop laughing, you're like, ooh, okay, they're making some point here, you know? Whereas I think there's, just quite a bit of just ridiculous, fun, chaotic comedy as well. The whole the basketball team was the basketball team, the sports team. I forget what sport they played.
Basketball.
Yeah, that whole bit, it's
Mhm.
there to be fun. But I think the sharper type of comedy is where there is such a tie between the funny moments and they're hilarious, but there's also just like I think a little bit more there. So I wished that could be a little bit more abundant in this film. Um, but I mean there's just I think a really smart construction of this film with centering it pretty predominantly around Audrey and the way that they've positioned her adoption story and finding her birth mother that I feel like is highlighting and spotlighting an experience that a lot of children of immigrants feel. Even though we are not adopted, there is that tension between cultures that I think them choosing to position it in this adoption story is actually really smart. I wouldn't have thought about that, but I thought that was a really smart choice, and we can unpack that a little bit more too. So there's some really great things happening in this film. I'm again just kind of impressed, like you, that this exists. I think that so many of the jokes, like I would say, like 85% of the jokes are so in tune with things that like the Asian community makes fun of itself for or laughs about collectively. Like there's a lot of like inside jokes which I thought were just really fun to include. This is directed by Adele Lim, which is awesome. So she's done some really amazing work and clearly is in tune with what's happening in the AAPI community. So all of those were just really fun. I just am like kind of surprised that this exists. This type of comedy and the jokes and stuff is something that I feel like I've seen a lot more of on YouTube, just like comedians doing bits about it or skits and whatnot. But the fact that there's a full feature length movie dedicated to jokes that kind of feel like inside jokes for our community is really fun, really special too.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah,
That's so
but I'm
cool.
also like the two 77-year-old white ladies in the audience. I'm like, was this movie funny for them? I want to know. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's a great question. Man, we need some post viewing surveys to be
Mm-hmm.
handed out after this movie.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm intrigued for um more of the population that isn't Asian, how much of this lands for them. Like even if they don't, it's kind of like the way that Marvel rewards their fans, right? With those Easter eggs. But even if you don't get those Easter eggs, the overall story really still works for the average viewer. And I wonder if that's the case for this movie.
I think so. I mean, obviously, like I don't get the inside jokes, but there were still like plenty of comedic moments, and there were
Yeah.
even moments where I was like, okay, I know that this is a joke, and I don't get it, but that's all right. Like that's fine. I love that. Keep
Mm-hmm.
going. But I think the overall message and the emotional arc can land
Yeah.
no matter who you are, you know,
Mhm.
but it'll just have deeper meaning for people who are adopted or
Mhm.
the AAPI community. And so I think that that's really cool to be able to share a story that to some degree is universal, but have additional meaning to those whose life experience is actually closer to what's being depicted on the screen.
Mm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think that's very true, and, like, there's a lot of throwaway, small little lines, especially with Sherry Cola's character, that I feel like if you catch are such gems, but if not, it's okay too, and just it's a hangout movie in a lot of ways too, and I think the chemistry and the dynamic between these 4 female actresses is incredibly strong, which I think also helps this movie a lot as well. Like, they clearly even if you don't get what the jab is, you know that there's, like, a fun little jab that Sherry Cola's character and Ashley Park's characters are bantering about, right? And that's inherently fun.
Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah.
genuinely feel like you're just hanging out with some friends, which is always a good time.
Yeah.
And like you said, because there are so many jabs, like
Mhm.
my goodness, like you said this earlier, like this film is really smart. And I think that you get that with a lot of the lines too, and the
Mm, mhm.
pace of the dialogue. There's just so much
Yeah.
happening
Yeah.
that whatever you can pick up is good, and you'll miss some stuff, but that's okay. We're just gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I think my one, like, critique of this film is that I actually think it would be a better film. Maybe this is just also personal preference, so I fully acknowledge that. But the dialogue is so sharp when they're just, like, on the street in somewhere in China just bantering back and forth. You know what I mean? That I actually don't think it needs the big over the top
Mm,
raunchy bits.
yeah, I
Maybe
agree.
that's it serves like a specific audience, and there's some discourse around like Asian women reclaiming their sexuality that's like very empowering and exciting about this film as well. So perhaps that's the purpose it serves. But like the whole basketball team sequence, I was like, there's such a smart humor that I've seen in other parts of this film. That this just feels like we're going over the top to be over the top and to do it big and have it be extravagant, which is fun, but you know, I would have liked this film better had we toned down that a little bit and toned up actually just the banter is so smart, and there's so many jokes littered throughout all of the sequences, that in of itself would have made this really strong in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's I just struggle with this type of humor just in general because
Mhm.
it
So
it
big.
it goes so over the top, and then it
Yeah.
goes so much further than
Yes.
I think that it should go.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going, 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 going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I just get tired of it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I can only handle so much. Whereas the banter, I was like, yes, this is
Yeah.
incredible. Please keep going.
Uh-huh.
But again, like this is not my type of movie. This is not my type of humor. And so I understand that certain people connect to this in a different way than I will. And that's
Yeah.
okay because I don't know. I feel like that's why comedy is so hard
Yeah.
sometimes. In some ways,
Mhm.
comedy is very universal, but also it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think this is an example because certain parts of this I thought were hilarious. And then there were other parts that I was like, okay, I was done with this bit like 5 minutes ago. I need you to be done.
Yep. Yep.
But what can you do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting point, which is that as the movie was opening, I was thinking about like, man, I haven't seen a movie like this in theaters in a long time. Partially probably because of, we just don't seek it out. But even with the like latest releases from the past couple of years, there's so many fewer of these type of movies than I think we've seen in maybe like the 2000s or the 2010s.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
because like you're saying comedy is becoming more niche and whatnot, that it can serve maybe reach its right audience through the streaming platforms versus kind of these big theater releases, which again I think it points to why the fact that this movie exists and was made and released in theaters nationally is just it's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, I was thinking about that too. Like, really surprised that this got a theater release and a wide
Mhm.
theater release too.
Yeah,
I think that
yeah,
that's pretty fascinating.
yeah.
But also, like, what a brilliant time in the calendar to release this too. Like,
Yes.
they
Yes.
found an opening and they were like, okay, we're going to take this. Because it really it came out in a weekend where there are no other giant franchise blockbusters.
Yeah.
And that's pretty brilliant. So
Yeah.
I'm very fascinated to see how this does at the box office.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I
That'll
read
be
a brief
pretty
headline that I
interesting.
think it's doing better than indie,
Oh,
which is
wow.
mind-boggling to
Okay.
me. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if part of that is there's a lot of just momentum and energy around this film in the Asian community. And I think that is helping galvanize probably the people just to go and support and be there for this. There's a lot of positioning of this being like the first of its kind. Like we haven't had a
Mm,
raunchy romp
mhm.
comedy with a full Asian cast featuring Asian stories with Asian jokes. Like this is exciting. So there's a lot of like of the similar energy as Crazy Rich Asians at the time of being like, this is exciting. This is a moment for us, which I think is helping. So good marketing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it's true. It is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we haven't seen movies like this before. So,
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm.
cool. And just to see, I don't know, I love it when female comedic actors are able to really shine
Yes.
because
Yes.
comedy is such an art form and it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to pull off, especially smart comedy. And like we've said, there is a lot of really, really smart humor in this, and so I'm glad that the women in particular behind this and on the screen are being celebrated because what
Yeah.
they've done is truly impressive.
Yes. Yes. And there's this really interesting conversation happening now around like it's empowering when a people group has the ability to make fun of themselves. Like one, it means that the opportunities have been made available to them, but two, that they are in those positions of influence to be able to create those stories themselves. So for decades and decades of movies that have been released where they've made fun of the Asian character or they've been the butt of the jokes, like it's reclaiming the ability to make fun of ourselves, which I just thought was like a really interesting concept around progress and empowerment. It is reclaiming the ability for us to tease ourselves and to do in a way that people that are from this community like feel so resonant with those quirks or those things that we all have experienced before and kind of sharing in the fun of all of that.
Wow, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that terms. Like we can now do this on our terms. We have the power and influence now to make fun of
Mhm.
ourselves. It really uh, was a reframing for me as well on like what this film also represents too, which I think was really great.
Wow. That
Yeah.
is, yeah, I love that. It's so true. After being the butt of jokes for Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
how many years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's wow. It's so interesting because like as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, oh wow, there's a lot of meaning here that like I can see as an outsider. But then there's so much additional meaning, when you have this lived experience, when you're a part of this community, then you're able to see just so much more that I am not able to see. That's I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. Uh okay, let's include a spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen Joyride, it is available out in theaters. We recommend checking it out before continuing to listen. And we now have full reign over the plot of this movie. Okay, so where should we go first?
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, like Audrey's storyline
Yes.
and all of that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the things that I found most compelling and I thought was just so strategically chosen was positioning Audrey as uh, um, a Chinese. Well, she's originally positioned as a Chinese girl adopted into uh, a white family, which we later learned that she's actually Korean, which that in even of itself was fascinating because
Mhm.
that actress is Korean. So the whole time I'm like,
Yeah.
why are they positioning her as in China? Like, why? What doesn't make sense? Like, this
Yeah.
feels like a miss. And then I love that the movie kind of addresses that and it's a whole plot point. I thought that was really smart. But the identity crisis that Audrey faces is very clear and clearly understood and very explicit because she's adopted into a white family. So of course she's assimilated and been raised in a family that is American. But I think what it does, it kind of emphasizes or enhances the feeling that a lot of immigrant children feel, which is torn between two cultures. Like there is this pressure or this desire to assimilate into the cultures that you have at school or with your friends. And for those of us that have grown up in like white suburbia, like where the predominant population is more white, that pressure is like a lot more prominent. And you see the way that she discovers her roots and begins to celebrate her roots and desires to understand more about where she came from, who she is, and what that means for her future and how she understands herself. But I thought that the way that they emphasize that a little bit more, make it I think a little bit clearer with her being an adopted child into a white family, I thought was just like a smart choice because I think that the nuances of the cultural tension for just like someone who is like Asian American might be more subtle or more nuanced than a film that is as big and extravagant as this. I think teasing that apart more and bringing that to light in a more prominent way was just like a really smart choice, um, because it's you can immediately empathize with that identity crisis that she experiences and then the self-discovery and that moment of kind of catharsis that she feels when she truly begins to embrace her desire to understand where she comes from. So I thought that just was like a really smart choice. I wouldn't have thought to do it that way. But as the movie was unfolding, I was like, this really can emphasize and build that empathy more quickly, perhaps, for maybe non Asian audiences or non people that aren't coming from immigrant families.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also shows like a good contrast between her and her other friends who are also Chinese American but have gone through different experiences. So they
Mm-hmm.
view their Asian identity maybe a little bit different than she does.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And I think the contrast between her and Lolo is pretty fascinating. Um, because I mean, I think Sherry Cola just brings so much charisma to the screen in this film.
Mm.
Uh, that in a lot of ways I think she is the foundation and the rock of a lot of the scenes. But Lolo as a character has fully embraced her identity, but has also like achieved a level of freedom that is not bound by the pressures of her identity. And so in a lot of ways, like I think Lolo is the future generations of Asian Americans where they fully appreciate and cherish and love their roots, but they also can break free from some of the pressures or um, the systems in place that get them to be constrained to those as well. So she's kind of this like really interesting mix and balance, with her art and her embrace of kind of progressive ideas and sexual freedom and all that kind of stuff. It is so forward thinking that she's leaning heavily into that. She's artistic. She isn't following the molds of like her parents' expectations of a stable career, which is a kind of a stereotype of Asian families. But also, she is the one who is pushing Audrey to go back to her roots. She herself is very connected with her family. You can see that in the way that she returns home and she immediately feels that bond and connection with her grandparents and her extended family. So she is kind of the uh, progress that Audrey eventually will be moving towards. But I think Lolo definitely is such a great foil to Audrey's character, who is searching or looking or still kind of caught between the pressures of her upbringing and the desire to assimilate, but also now this new desire to go back to her roots.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one thing that we've talked about quite a few times, I feel like anytime we review a movie that's centered around like Asian stories or Asian American stories, we often say like this is one good example of a story, but more
Mm-hmm.
data points. Um, and I feel like this film gives us a few different data points that look different than what we've seen before. I feel like
Yes,
we often
yes.
see Asian characters in Audrey's position who,
Mm-hmm.
need to be perfect, doctor, lawyer, whatever, like all of that feeling, or having,
Mm-hmm.
the aloof Asian parent, and the child needing to like learn their emotions. Like we've seen those kind of stories quite frequently, which is something that a lot of people experience. So yes, we
Mm-hmm.
need those stories to be told. But you're right, like Lolo is something completely different that
Yeah.
we really haven't seen before. She is a new data point that we get to include in our
It
set.
is.
And it's just so
Yeah.
cool to see that creativity and that freedom, and the way, in some ways, I feel like Lolo is very American because she's able to
Mm.
embrace that freedom and express that. So she's this like really healthy, beautiful combination of Chinese American, where I feel like Audrey is like the unhealthy version of
Yes. Yes.
Korean American. And so that's, again, like they're very good foils, and that's just fascinating to think about Lolo in that way. I hadn't put her in the context of other Asian American characters that we've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. I found myself incredibly drawn to Lolo. And part of I think just Sherry Cole is electric,
Yeah.
but I think there's like a hopefulness about her in the way that she's able to hold these two ideals and these two sides of her in conversation with each other in a really healthy way that is like really beautiful too, because even in the end of the film, right, like she's not like, let me go be an artist and reject all of the things that my parents have poured into and their businesses and the desire that they have for me to be part of the family business. No, she's going to pursue that too, and also help out in her family's business and then the restaurant at the end. Do you know what I mean? Like there's this like really great balance and integration that she's achieved that is exciting. I think it's forged kind of a newer way. Actually, this is a great follow up to the conversation that we had in Elemental, which one of my critiques of Elemental is,
Mm-hmm.
man, I hate that we always see this like, here's the like super oppressive parent that wants the kid to fulfill and be part of their family business, and it often ends with the child rejecting that and going their own path entirely, right? And Lolo is this example of like, why doesn't need to be either or? Is there a way that they can be, in fact, more integrated together? Here's her lucky cat, licking cat, um, in the family's restaurant, and she's going to help out, but she's still going to pursue her passions and for her art. Like these two things can exist together.
Yeah, and even her relationship with her family, because obviously she's
Yes.
very different from her parents. She's very different from the rest of her family, and they even playfully joke about it with her. And so it's understanding that she's very different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be this rift between them. But they still have common
Yeah.
ground and a common
Yeah.
bond. And I think that is something that we don't often see in media.
Actually, that's a really great point that I didn't even think about it from the other direction, which is that the parents' kind of acceptance and a willingness to be able to just tease her about, her needing a lawyer at some point again,
Yeah.
like there is an acknowledgement of her quirkiness and the, the path that she's taking. without it being like a you have disappointed me entirely, or the flip side of it being this like rousing approval of it as well. It's just somewhere in between of like we accept you for who you are, even if we may not fully have desired this for you. Like we know that you're on your path and we're going to be here to support you. It just feels a lot more balanced. You know, Elemental I think showcases the two extremes. The father wants you to be part of the family business. You reject it. The father now fully supports you just going off and pursuing your dreams. Like
Yeah.
the pendulum swing I think is partially a little unrealistic, but also partially just like not really healthy either. Like there's a happy middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like that because I feel like Elemental, granted, it is a children's movie, so we need to simplify some things.
That's true.
But it can set up some unrealistic expectations of what acceptance looks like and what support looks like. And I feel like this is maybe a more realistic example of what that could look like if you're a free spirit artist.
Yes.
I mean, it's gonna look a little different.
Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts about Joyride? Things we want to talk about.
One of the things that I love that
Yes.
this film does is
Mhm.
that when Audrey loses her job, she doesn't get it back. And I feel like if this movie had been made 20 years ago, she would have
Yeah.
been fired, but then there would be some way to like claw herself back to getting the job and actually getting a promotion in the end. And so I love that this film rejects that. And instead of going back into this, structure that we know of, you 9 to 5, you work your way up the ladder, she chooses to, branch out and start her own firm. And I think that that was a very smart choice, not just for the character, but for the time that we're in right now. And so many people are starting their own things, and work looks a little bit different today than it used to. So I love that choice that they made.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And also, this is true of quite a few people that I know that have either lost jobs or whatnot, but it's often pushed them to think about what do they really want to do next. And sometimes it's the nudge that they needed to start that business that they've always been planning for. There was a friend of a friend that I knew that like had been dreaming about opening up a new restaurant. She's already owned one, and just was laid off and was like, maybe this is the opportunity for me. But yeah, you're right. I think the overly idealistic version of this is that she finally gets to woo the Ronnie Chiang, the Chinese businessman, and the deal goes through and she gets the promo, which I think it's just a little bit more on the nose. It's a little bit less interesting actually.
And I think it's also just, I don't know, the way that we view work and capitalism is just so different than I feel like we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see more movies like this who characters' points of growth will be like leaving these work structures that used to be so revered in television and movies. I'm interested to see how our relationship with work as a society changes, how it will continue to change in the media that we consume.
Yeah. Well, and you also see so many times throughout this movie her just being tied to, so beholden
Yeah.
to this job. You know what I mean? Like just so dedicated, working at the airport, like just slaving away at it, always at its beckoning call. And in the end, like, I mean, I felt the catharsis for her of just like being done with that, being done with having to like kiss up to her like boss who is just microaggressions left and right towards her, you know what I mean? But just kind of having to endure it because she's waiting for that career move. I mean, I think that's part of the self-discovery and growth for Audrey, in addition to her going back to her roots. But that in of itself too is pretty neat to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, break free.
Free of the man.
You don't have to be in that situation anymore.
Yeah. I do wonder how much our movies will like swing to the other side, which is, you know, we've talked about in the past, like the glorification of the idea of starting on your own too.
Mm-hmm.
Like the minute she said she was gonna start on for, I was like, "Ooh, it's gonna be hard
real
work."
hard.
Yeah, like this sounds really fun, but it's gonna be a lot of work too. Different.
Yeah. Yes. And hopefully more rewarding work. And obviously in a healthier space, but it's not easy.
Yeah. One of the scenes that I just thought was so interesting to me that I think showcases how much this film is willing to go there and bring in these like nuances of the Asian experience is the scene where Audrey chooses the train car with the white woman because she feels more comfortable.
Yeah.
And we get the whole debacle of realizing that she's a drug dealer. But the way that her friends afterwards, when they get kicked off the train, kind of roast her for it and joke about her being prejudiced against her own people. I just thought that scene was, I'm just impressed that scene made it in. You know what I mean? Because I think it highlights and sheds light on this kind of interesting dynamic of being whitewashed and almost being prejudiced against your own people. And they make fun of her for that exact thing. And I think she also begins to admit it and realize it herself. I know they make the joke with her as well around her never wanting to date Asian men, right? But the willingness for this film to go to those places and kind of usher in these pretty nuanced and more deeper conversations around like the celebration of your culture, but then also the pressures or the messages we've received from society to conform and assimilate. I just thought that was a really, really poignant scene, and I loved that it was included in there. So I thought that was just a great example of it. That scene was hilarious, so much fun, one of my favorite scenes. So it checks off the entertainment, you know, checkbox, but also there's a lot more there than meets the eye too.
Mm-hmm. And I also love that we see a group of female friends making fun of each other. I feel like we don't have as many examples of that in media. I feel like
healthy
yeah, and
banter.
I feel like a lot of like female humor in movies has looked different than this. And like we're used to seeing a bunch of dudes making fun of each other, but how often do we see female friends joking and pointing these things out in media? And so I thought that was really, really healthy to see. And it's not this like, it's not mean, but it's out of love, and it's using humor to make a larger point, like you said. So it was so well done.
Oh, they absolutely roast her.
Yeah.
They roast her to a crisp.
And she deserves it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so fun too, is like we go on that journey with them, you know, like we see her being all like paranoid at the train station and like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get like my stuff stolen, and then, you know, thinking that the couple with the oranges are drug dealers, and then she chooses the cabin with the clear drug dealer. Like you open the cabin door and it's like, no, she's shady, you need to move on. So like, because we've gone through this journey with these characters and we clearly know that she has made these decisions because she's more comfortable with white people, then when her friends roast her, we're already in on the joke and we already agree with everything that they're saying. So it doesn't feel out of place. Like it was just it was so well done. It's so smart. Great writing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think what's interesting too is that I think Audrey's character could easily have been more hated as a character, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
But there's this like there's something endearing about her, and I think that the way that Ashley Park plays her as well, that you feel that same like you want to roast her, but also she's incredibly endearing. You have love for her as well, and I think that's through those other three women that we are also on this journey with together. Like we see Audrey through their eyes, through their love for her as a friend. So like those little, but in those little moments too, where she she's like, oh my gosh, I love China. You're just like, oh
Yeah.
hun, but also you can't help it kind of root for her too. And I think by the time we get to the ending, like we are so on board and just rooting for her. That scene with watching her mother's video,
Oh,
like
yes.
just rip your heart to shreds,
It's
like
true.
yeah. So I think because there's a relatability that we all feel around the tensions between ourselves and that desire to find ourselves, we can relate to her too. As clueless as she can be sometimes, we kind of are all her in some ways as well.
And I think that's one of the things that this film does so well is like this journey of discovering who you are is so relatable, so
Mm-hmm.
universal, no matter what your experience is. But then if you are, you know, Chinese American or you are adopted or like any of these
Mm-hmm.
other things, then there are these deeper layers of meaning. But we all can empathize with Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other characters to some extent too. It was just, again, such smart writing, such smart character decisions to make this film more widely acceptable while telling a narrow story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Completely agree. And I think one other point with Audrey's character that I think the movie sets up pretty early on that I think immediately bonds us to her is that uh, her desire to prove herself. Like we see from a young age that there was this traumatic moment where she felt put down or less than. And there's this little montage of her doing like getting all of the trophies and the accomplishments
Mm-hmm.
and the awards. And now she's this like super workaholic lawyer. Like I think we can all relate to that too, of like we've channeled our desire to be valuable and worthy into all these things, right? And so from the beginning we see her as deeply human, and therefore everything else that she does, we just are there to love her through the eyes of all of her friends too. But she's positioned to be incredibly human instead of the butt of the jokes from the beginning too, which I think is smart character choices.
And we love a like meritocracy, pull yourself up from your
We did.
bootstrap. Like we love that
Yeah.
story, and in many ways, Audrey does fit that
Yeah.
because she is so competent, uh,
Yeah.
and we love to see it. We love to see
Mhm.
people who are good at their jobs excelling in their jobs,
Yep.
and
Yep.
she is. And then things go haywire,
Things go
which is
very
funny.
haywire. Yes. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to point out, which I thought was I think probably pretty intentional from this movie, is the number of like Asian males that are positioned to be attractive. I think that
Yes.
feels like such an intentional choice that this
Yeah.
film is looking to make. It's just been such a sore spot for Asian males around not being portrayed that way in media, and to be the love interest or to be masculine in media. And the fact that this movie is littered with them feels like such an intentional choice from the creators, which I just appreciated that little piece. There's a whole sequence of just Asian dudes from a basketball team that are positioned as the sex objects. So that's great for this movie.
Well, and when Clarence first shows up,
Yeah.
I immediately flashed back to our Crazy Rich Asians
Yeah.
conversation because we talked about this. And I
Mhm.
was like, yes, we need more Asian males who are positioned as the hot dude that everybody's after.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yep.
so it's just again like what we've been talking representation is so
Yeah.
important. And
Mhm.
I love that we get to see so many examples of, you know, Asian men being desirable on the screen because
Uh-huh.
there's been a lot of years of that not being the case. So
Mhm. Yeah.
we're flipping the script.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah. And it's so in your face that I'm like, they
Yeah.
made sure this point was very clear, like very well designed, well crafted choices were made with lots of
Yes, and
intention.
made over and over and over again.
Over
You
and over
yeah.
again.
There's no way you can miss this point.
No, not at all. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Any other last thoughts about Joyride?
I one other thing that I really appreciated is that at the beginning of the film we see Audrey at work with all of her male colleagues, and just the way that
Yeah.
she has to like prove herself with these guys.
Oh,
And
gosh.
then the
Yeah.
rest of the film is her with her female friends, and I just thought that that was such an interesting dynamic to show how these different relationships look and how Audrey was the only woman with these dudes, not to mention the only Asian in a bunch of white
Mhm.
guys, and just the way that those conversations go, the way that she needs to prove herself, uh, and then seeing how she acts so differently with her female friends, I thought that that was a really intelligent contrast to show us these different facets of Audrey. So then when she finally, in the end, like starts to figure out who she is as a person, it makes more sense that she doesn't have to put on this front that she had to in order to survive in this place of
Mm.
toxic white masculinity, but she can be more of herself in all of these
Yeah,
facets. Yeah.
that's a really great point that I didn't really realize. But you see the way that she's able to kind of take that mask off and take that guard off a little bit, and there's a softness to her. There's a willingness to like be confused or ask questions that we don't see. She has to kind of posture up when she's around her male coworkers. Yeah, yeah, that's a really great point.
Yep. Show no weakness. Have to be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best. Like you can't just be good, but you have to be better than, and then probably
Mhm.
like even better than that, being both Asian
Mhm.
and a woman.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, that need to prove herself.
And you see the way that she just endures some of the, like, side comments from her boss
Yeah.
around, like, as an associate,
Ugh,
not an Asian, I'm not
yeah.
typecasting you, just and she you don't see her you kinda see her, like, cringe a little bit, but she just kinda takes it because the
Mm,
system.
yeah, because you have to, because he's your
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is even like his constant like I'm I was gonna say associate because I'm an ally, like all
Because
that.
'Cause I'm an ally. Oh my gosh, yeah, so
That
good.
constant refrain from him I thought was so good and so incriminating about like, okay, what does it actually mean to be an ally? You know, so many
Yeah.
people are saying certain things because they've picked up certain words, but the actions and what they're actually communicating is something very different. And so
Mm.
I think that that was obviously like it's a funny moment, but it's also a very scathing, you know, pointing a finger at like, okay, people like specifically white people in power.
Yeah.
This is not how you be an ally.
No. Not at all. It's othering while saying that they're not othering you, you know?
Yes. It's
Like,
just gaslighting and horrible. Like, oh
yeah,
my God.
let me make you feel like you don't belong, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell you that I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Like, oh
Oh,
man,
the
that
worst.
boss.
He's awful.
So rough. So rough. Yeah.
But Audrey got out.
Yes.
Thankfully.
She did. I have one last little shout out, which is I just love the amount of Chinese that's spoken and the subtitles.
Yes.
Like, yes, we can handle it. We can handle it. I was thinking about Bong Joon-ho's Academy Awards speech around like when you get past the 3-inch bar at the bottom of your screen, there's a whole world opened up to you. And I feel like the increase in the amount of foreign films and TV shows that have just been ushered in the past, honestly, 5 to like 8 years has, I think, just created so much more willingness and opportunity for us as audiences to bring in culture in a way that we haven't before. You know, we talked about this when I think we reviewed the live action Mulan, where I think like there's a whole opening segment that's spoken all in Chinese with subtitles. And it's like, yes, we as American audiences can handle reading. It's okay. We can do it. And I thought it just added a really interesting authenticity to a lot of the experience, especially when they're like talking to the Chinese businessman with Ronnie Chang in the club. It was just added to a lot more of the fun and the culture of that moment instead of him just immediately speaking Chinese. And he says that himself too. You know, like people often assume that I can't speak, so it's just kind of fun to see how it plays out. So I just loved the willingness for the film to go there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's also really, really valuable for certain pockets of white America to be exposed to more situations like this where people speak multiple languages and you see, you know, both Lolo and Kat switching back and forth between English and Chinese when they need to. And I think that that is a really important thing to showcase, that that is such a skill and it's an important skill. And it's an important part of culture too that should be acknowledged and celebrated. And you know, being able to speak English is great. It opens up a lot to you. But there are also other cultures and other languages that people need to be able to communicate in. And it's to somebody's detriment sometimes when you only speak English. And it can be that really added asset if you are able to speak other languages and operate in these other cultures. So I think like we as audiences can read subtitles and that opens up way more media to us. But I think also like normalizing how these conversations can flow and people operating in multiple cultures, operating in multiple languages, I think is really valuable to see.
Yeah. And the kind of, I think that you brought up a really great point around like the flow of these conversations and the way that people can switch back and forth between languages seamlessly, and what that, who they're talking to might change the language and their style of communication. I think we saw this in West Side Story as well, with her switching back and forth between Spanish at home versus when she's out in public, and the way that that creates just a more multidimensional character and person than she's just having to speak English at home too, even though that's not authentic to that character and who she is as a Puerto Rican, right? Like all of that, I think adds a lot for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so relatable. There's so many people who speak a different language at home, or, you know, speak a mix of languages at home. And I think that that's really, really beautiful, and something as a white person who has only ever spoken English, both inside and outside the home, more and more I'm coming to really appreciate those friends who are multilingual and multicultural, because that's just not an experience that I have had. And so I'm learning to see more of that beauty, and honestly just being more impressed with people who can, like Kat and Lolo did, like flowing in between English and Chinese so seamlessly like that. Like, oh my gosh, I was absolutely blown away. My brain would explode.
Yeah. Okay. Any other last thoughts, or did we hit them all?
I also just want to give a shout out to Daniel Day Kim.
Yes.
Who, he is a gem I got so excited when he showed
Yes.
up. I was like, yes, you had to be in this. Just a wonderful person, wonderful actor. It was great to see him in this for his
That
little role.
voice though. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. Yeah. He was the perfect person to play this like
Mm-hmm.
calm, soothing,
Yes.
like loving, gentle
Yeah.
husband of her birth mother.
Yeah.
Like, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's so likable as
Yes.
just an actor, but also just brought so much to this character. He
Yeah.
was just so fun to see. And
Mm-hmm.
his sweater
So
game
excited.
was on point,
Yes.
which is always nice to see.
His home too.
Oh,
Or I guess their home.
gorgeous.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Gorgeous.
I'm like, Audrey, I don't know why you're leaving to go back to
Hello.
America.
Yeah, please stay there.
He goes,
That's
leaving so soon?
beautiful.
I'm like, yeah, Audrey, leaving so soon? What the heck, girl?
Yeah,
Come on.
let's explore Seoul just a little bit.
Yes.
Like,
Stay a while.
yeah, can you keep us there with you though?
Yeah.
Like, we also want to see.
As viewers of this movie, we do not want you to be leaving Daniel Day Kim. Okay.
We voted, and
Yes.
you're staying here.
All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Joyride. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about Joyride. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Very long title, which Sarah loves.
Mm-hmm. There are 3 whole punctuation points in this one title. That's really too many. We are out of control.
It's very long. All right, well, we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.